john@soypal. Or you can email John direct. Right now, though, let's say hello to John Atack. He's the best-selling author of Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. And he's a former Scientologist.
You got into Scientology age 19. Why was that? Were your parents in it, or it was an independent decision?
It was my decision. I had a bad breakup with a girlfriend, and I was looking around for something, and I read one of Hubbard's books, and it appealed to me, and along I went. And
tell me whether you think this theory is good or bad that I have, which is that often if people need to talk to someone, and either their family environment that doesn't happen, or their groups of friends that doesn't happen, and they bump into someone who happens to be whoever, a Scientologist or some other group, they feel a lot better because they're talking, and the person can get confused and think, oh, that's something because it's unique about the teachings of Scientology. That's why I'm feeling so comfortable. When really, had they been able to sit and talk with the greengrocer or their auntie or their mate, they might have felt the same thing.
It's true. I mean, I actually did try and talk. I talked with a vicar. I talked with my doctor, and I didn't feel they helped me at all. But I mean, the other thing is that anybody, if you're sort of dislocated in any way from your usual life and your usual habits, you've had a breakup or you've moved to a new town, you've lost your job, any point of change, and it can be a good change as well as a bad, makes you vulnerable. And if people then come along and sort of say lovely things to you about how great you are and give you a little personality test which says, oh, but you could do with sorting this out, and then dump you into some intensely hypnotic procedures, you find, there you are and you're involved.
And did you...
It's several years later,
Yeah, and did you also feel like you wanted to join some sort of gang, or some sort of group, like be a part of something that was lacking in your life up until then?
Not for me, no. I came from a Buddhist background, and I felt, I had a lot of friends. There's no sense of isolation or loneliness for me. It was just that I was upset, and nobody I was talking to was making me feel better. Now, the Scientologists didn't make me feel better, and in fact, we never actually addressed the upset, because they've got their own system, and they put you sort of on the assembly line and just do what they're going to do to you. Every time saying, this will cure your problems. I mean, when I did the top level that I did, the OT4 as they call it, and I went in and I said, look, I don't think this has really helped, and you've had, £2,000 of my money. I was told, a lot of people find that. You need to do the next level, which will be another £5,000,
Now, you said you had a Buddhist background. Are you dark on Buddhism too? How do you compare your experience with Buddhism with your experience with Scientology?
My experience with Buddhism has been entirely positive. I have doubts about people who go into monasteries in Buddhism. Some of the Zen monasteries are a bit too severe. When I was involved, we were told we don't use the Zen stick, and I said, "What's the Zen stick?" And they said, "If anybody moves when they're meditating, we thwack them on the back." So, I wouldn't be up for that. But no, I've never had a bad experience with a Buddhist.
And so what's going on in Scientology that's not going on in Buddhism? Because it's clear it's not like you just have an objection to spirituality and religion outright. So what is the distinction with Scientology that you think makes it different?
It's kind of spiritually vampiric. Hubbard was a very ill man throughout his life. He was a multiple drug abuser, and he actually in early lectures admitted to taking barbiturates and amphetamines. He drank heavily, and he put on this sort of facade of spiritual superiority. But the truth is that while he claimed that you could become clear, which he said would mean you've got a fantastic IQ, a perfect memory, totally good health, nobody ever got this stage. It was always, somewhere over the rainbow.
But is that the thing that makes it unacceptable in your eyes, or is it? I would have thought it's something more like money, but I'm not putting words in your mouth. You could there's a lot of religious beliefs, even like Catholicism, where you can there's a manner to engage with it without having to open your wallet and hand over £2,000.
Which you cannot do with Scientology. you can't get anywhere. I mean, they'll always say, yeah, but we do lots of cheap courses, but they're always selling you the next one. I, at one point, was sat down for 13 hours by two of their salespeople. And one of them actually had a cheque written out that which would allow me to borrow £7,000 to do the next level. And they just kept on going. I mean, we didn't eat during that 13-hour period. And they do hard selling courses. The people are selling. They use these awful techniques. It's very intense.
And do you think the head Scientologists, the people up above, are sincere to themselves, like in so much as they actually believe what they're doing, or is it cynical and it's like, well, we need more money and we've got a pyramid system and we just need more bodies?
I think that there's, it is completely controlled by a man called David Miscavige, who left school at the age of 14 to join, and by the time he was 15 was working for Hubbard. I think he probably does believe, but we're hearing horrific stories of his aggression. I mean, he's beating people, locking them up for weeks on end, putting them on rice and beans diets for months together, separating couples. I mean, probably the worst thing is the enforced abortion rule, that if you work at the higher levels, you're told to go and get an abortion if you get pregnant.
And do you think the internet has changed everything?
Like, a guy who wrote a puff for the republication of my book, which is now out with 60 passages that were missing in the first edition because of US law at that time. But he said, before there was safety in numbers, before there was the internet, there was John Atack. And it was pretty much like that there were, in fact, about 4 or 5 of us anywhere in the world who were standing up, because the harassment you get, they will sue you, they'll follow you, they'll accuse you of child molesting, they'll go round to everybody they can find. And in fact, actually, I had a girlfriend who went to Australia and they sent a private detective out from the US to interview her, to see if they could dig up any dirt on me. It's really appalling.
And are they starting to hurt in the hip pocket with a lot of famous, or at least some famous members coming out? The director of that
Leah
film.
Rimini.
Yes.
And Paul Haggis.
Yeah, Paul Haggis, who was the director of...
Won 2 Oscars. I mean, he wrote $1 Million Baby, and he got an Oscar for Crash, which is a brilliant movie. He also was the creator of Due South. I think that's hurting them, but what's happened is that some top-level members have left, and they're talking about what really happens at the top. And of course the celebrities hear nothing of that. They're given the velvet glove treatment, the red carpet treatment all the way. And they don't realise that there are people working 90 hours a week who, living on appalling diets, being paid $10 a week for what they're doing, and just being pretty much trafficked. I mean, there have been several charges of human trafficking that have come up where people have been, they're just exported to another country to stop them from, complaining.
One thing that big organisations do, whether it's the cigarette industry or whether it's the evangelical Christians, is once they've burnt all the white people, they move offshore and start going, oh, well, let's try to find our next money-making scheme over either in Africa or in Latin America or over in Asia. Or even in America, they might start targeting, the African American community, because they see that as a market that they haven't
menthol cigarettes.
Yes, that they haven't tried to get to yet. And is something like that happening with Scientology, where they're trying to get into other markets?
Yeah, I mean they've gone into India. They went into Russia in a big way back in the 90s. They actually got a contract to train the people in the nuclear missile silos. And luckily I was able to get in the way of that, because sort of, the guy with his finger on the button being trained in Scientology is just too frightening. Yeah,
and especially because I guess in a Western country in that are more secular, Scientology has a certain impact, but some of these other countries, they've already got their own mystical beliefs and superstitious beliefs that are confusing and dangerous in their own ways, and I can't imagine the damage that could be done, because they might in some ways be more open to something like Scientology?
They're more vulnerable because, again, anything that comes from America, anything that comes from the West is fantastic, and just because of that. In Russia, in fact, there's a massive Scientology movement now. A lot of it actually outside the so-called Church of Scientology. In fact, there are probably more practitioners outside the cult now than inside it, but they're pretty scary too. They're not as yet as dangerous as Scientology, but I mean the worst thing is that there are different levels of procedure, so that if you're just an ordinary member of the public, Hubbard wrote things that you could see. So he'd say, if Scientology is attacked, advocate total freedom. That's all we do. Then as you go down, there's a policy for Scientologists. Then as you go below that, there's an intelligence bureau. And they're still running it. It's still run on exactly the same policies and principles that got 11 of them sent to prison in the US for infiltrating government officers, that every page of the 800-page pack they were trained on, which includes how to break and enter, how to lie to people, which they do drills on. It's all still there, which is why the Germans, of course, have said you can't be in the civil service and be a Scientologist.
Very interesting stuff. Now, your book is called Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky by John. Yep. Can you please pronounce the surname, Father Bob?
Atack.
Atack. I keep on saying attack and getting wrapped across the knuckle. Thank you very much for joining us. And, dear listeners, keep on listening in. We're going to have ethical dilemmas. We're going to have a discussion about whether you should get a tattoo on your